My name is Jeff, and I'm the campus pastor here. So good to see you guys as we continue in our series, My Big Mouth. And so my hope this morning is that my big mouth doesn't come out and you hear things. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, it was Valentine's Day this past week for all of you in the room who did not know. And hopefully you got that special someone, something good for Valentine's Day. For Natalie, I didn't know what to get her. We've been married for almost 10 years now. And you know when you get to that point and you're like, what else am I going to buy them? You know, right? Like, what am I going to buy my spouse? And so we were down in Portland recently with her mom and her stepdad. And they had these new mugs from Starbucks. And they're called Ember. Maybe you've seen these. There's a picture up on the screen here. It's a ceramic mug, and what's cool about it is you can control the temperature of your tea or your coffee from your smartphone, and it keeps it at that temperature for a few hours. It's remarkable. Now, if you have kids in the room, you know how amazing this could possibly be, because how many of you have made a cup of coffee or tea in the morning and have gone about your day and come back about 2-3 hours later when you finally have time to yourself and you realize it's cold, so you put it in the microwave, right? So I got her this mug, and it was going to be a great opportunity to surprise her, and it was going to be a great gift. And so I was hanging out with Pastor Brian, our Issaquah campus pastor, this last week on Tuesday, the day before Valentine's Day. And he said, hey, what are you getting Natalie? I don't know what to give my wife a tweet. And so I said, hey, this is what I'm getting her. And he said, oh, that's going to be perfect. Like, I love it. And so he went out and he bought one for Tweet, his wife, as well. And I gave Natalie hers on Tuesday night so that she could use it on Valentine's Day morning. And so, plus I just can never hold back gifts myself. And so I was giving to her early, and so I gave her a gift early. And then the next day, she loved it. Then the next day I come home for lunch, and she's like, hey, I have a question I need to ask you. Now, how many of you are married or have been married for long enough to know that when they say, hey, I have a question that I need to ask you, especially in that tone, that it's not going to be something like, hey, what are you doing later today, right? It's usually something a little different. And so she said, hey, where'd you get that idea for that Ember mug? And I was like, why? She's like, because Tweet posted it all over Facebook. And she's like, did you get it from Brian? I was like, no, Brian got it from me, I promise. And so I was like, Brian got it from me. And she's like, okay, I believe you. And I was like, yeah, because when we were down there, we saw it with your parents. And she's like, no, I believe you, okay. So I got double brownie points, because not only was it a great gift for my wife, but it was a great gift for Twee as well, too. And so it was pretty good. Well, hey, today we are talking about my big mouth. And over the past few weeks, we've been talking about how to have communication and how to really communicate the way that God would want us to communicate, rather than our culture and the way that our world typically does communicate. Now, how many of you in the room are married? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have a friend in the room? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have kids? How many of you have any relationships whatsoever? How many of you have ever messed up in communication in your entire life, right? We all have. And so for all of us today, speaking to myself included, we all need help with communication. So here what we do at Timberlake is we work through the Bible. We use the Bible as our frame and our reference. And so you can bring your Bibles if you want to, or you can just take out your outline that you're handed on the way inside that program. And there's the verses we can follow along with on there. If you're type A like myself, there's some fill-in-the-blanks as well on there, and you're going to want to fill in those this morning. And if I miss one, turn to your neighbor and they'll get it for you. So today we're going to start, and we're going to read Romans chapter 12, verse 2. A lot of us, if you've been in church for a long time, have heard this verse, but I think it's just so key, is what it says. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but rather let God transform. And if you want to underline that word transform there, that's what we're going to be really talking about this morning. Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Changing the way you think. So what I want to talk about this morning is really how to transform our communication. To not just communicate the way that we've always communicated, but really to communicate the way that God would want us to communicate as we look through the frame and reference of the Bible. Well, Natalie still needs a lot of work in this area. And I guess I do a little bit as well, too. And she's not here this service, so I can say stuff like this, right? She'll be here next service, and then I'll have to watch what I say, right? We're talking about my big mouth. And so the other night, here's a little example of why I need some help in this area. The other night, we were going to bed, and we go through our regular routines, and we're getting ready for bed, and she turns off the light. And I make a snarky comment, hey, it would be nice to be able to see as I'm getting ready for bed, right? And she said, oh, I'm sorry, did you want me to turn the light back on? And I said, well, once again, it would have been nice to be able to see. And she's like, okay, well, if I turn it on, I'm not going to turn it back off. And so I said, nothing at this point, because I was, testing her a little bit. And she walks over from the bed over to the light switch in our room, and right before she hits it back up, I say, no, don't turn it back on. And at that point, she'd already made up in her mind that she was going to turn it back on. So she turns the light switch back on, and then it was a mad dash to see who could get into bed first, because whoever was last had to go turn the light back off again, right? And so I got in bed first, and then she got in bed, and then I pulled the covers over my head, and I'm like, I can sleep with the light out, I don't care. And we go into this debate back and forth, and she's finally getting a little frustrated with me, I'm getting a little frustrated with her, and I'm like, I told you no, I didn't want it back on. And she's like, well, just go turn it off then. And at that point, I'm a little competitive. And so I didn't want to lose. And so we sit there for about 5 minutes, and finally I'm like, okay, whatever. And so I get up, I go out of bed, I turn it off, and at this point I start pouting, and pride starts to set in, and because I just lost, and even though I did it because I loved her so much. And so I went and I sat on the couch downstairs for about 5 minutes, and then I came back upstairs, and I was like, I'm a jerk. And so I went and I crawled back into bed, and she's all loving and nice and tries to rub my back, and I huddle over as close as I could on my side so she wouldn't even, touch my back, and I'm frustrated. Now, we're still married, we worked through it, but how remarkable is it that we can go through some silly, small little thing like this, and it can blow up into something so big, all because of the way that we really communicate, right? Matthew 12, 36 through 37 says this, but I tell you that everyone will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. And then it goes on in verse 37 to say, for by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. And I love how the Message paraphrase says it. It's not in your notes, but it'll be up here on the screen. It says, let me tell you something. Every one of these careless words is going to come back to haunt you. There will be a time of reckoning. Words are powerful. Take them seriously. Words can be your salvation, or words can also be your damnation. Maybe you want to underline the word powerful and seriously. And what I want you to realize is that every single word we say, we're going to take an account for. God, one day when we stand before Him on Judgment Day, He's going to run through every single word that we have said, whether good or bad. And so our words are powerful. And now here's the reality, is that Jesus, yes, has saved us, and He's forgiven us for all those words. But we all have words that we wish we could have taken back, right? And so our words still have consequences still here on this life. And if you have a relationship in this room, you know that to be true when your spouse brings something up in a conversation that gets a little heated later on that maybe you said even a few years ago that they still are holding on to. Why? Because our words are powerful. They really are. And this is Jesus speaking here. So the words that we speak today will decide who and where you will end up tomorrow. I truly believe that to be true. So today I want to talk about how we can really communicate God's way. And so to do that, it won't be on your outline, but they will be up here on the screen. You guys can go through these. We're going to go through 4 levels of communication. 4 levels of really how we communicate. The first one is surface communication. Surface communication. This is when you show up to work on Monday morning, and you exchange pleasantries, you exchange the nod, or throw up the hey, how's it going, right? But you don't really ever intend to go much further in this level of communication, rather than just exchanging pleasantries. You don't really ever want to have a conversation. This is just really surface communication. Then there's number 2, general information. Maybe this is how you're living in your marriages today, where you're just exchanging the facts of what's going to go throughout your day. Maybe if you're going to go to the gym after work, or who's going to take what kid to school, and you just exchange facts, but this is really all that your relationship has really turned into. It's not anything deeper than this, and you're just exchanging facts, and you're like ships passing in the night, and that's really all that you are at. Or maybe you're this way with a friend too, where you just have some information. I have this kind of level of conversation with people, with a group that I hang out with. I've shared this before, maybe you haven't been here for this. I enjoy watches, and so I'm a part of watch groups. We all have our hobbies. I'm a little weird, I know, I understand. You can make fun of me. I'm secure. And so I like watches, and so I go and I hang out with guys who like watches as well. And we can geek out on every reference number of every kind of watch and talk about the movements and this and that. And so one of these guys was up from Tacoma to a group that we were hanging out over in Seattle. And there was a guy from Chicago who was hanging out with this group who was showing his new watch that he was releasing. And so we were talking about this. And this guy who came up from Tacoma had one of this guy's older watches. And so we were talking about that one. And so we exchanged Instagram names. And he reached out to me this last week. I can't make this up. And said, hey, I just want to ask you, are you a Christian? And I was like, yeah, actually I am. I'm actually a pastor too. He's like, what? No way. He's like, I grew up going to Bible college. I grew up and I went to Bible college. And then after that, I kind of walked away and done my own thing. But when we were hanging out, I just knew that there was something different about you. And so, as weird as this may sound, I'm in my late 30s. I don't really have that many relationships in my life. I'm not married. I've got a few friends. He's like, this may sound really weird, but would you be my friend? I'm like, I can't make this up. And I'm like, what do you say, right? You just told the guy you're a pastor. So I'm like, yes, of course I'll be your friend. No, I mean, I wanted to be his friend. And so I was like, bro, what's cool is that one of our mottos of our church is that no one stands alone. And I was like, that is the core of what we believe, is that no one stands alone, and that everybody should have a friend to communicate with. And so I was like, of course, I'd love to be your friend. And so that brings us to our third level of communication, really, that I think everybody really wants, and that's deep feelings. Everybody wants to have a conversation where they can exchange deep feelings with someone and really go beyond that surface level, go beyond just the exchanging the pleasantries and really the facts of life, but they want to really share what is going on in life. But in a lot of our levels of communication, we don't really get to this level. Now, I know Valentine's Day just happened, but guys in the room today, if you want to know the 4 most romantic words you could ever speak to your spouse, and it's funny, all the guys just look at me with eye contact in the room, and their ears are perked. Ready? Here's the 4 most romantic words you can ever speak to your spouse. It's, please tell me more. Please tell me more. Because how many of you have ever been in a conversation with your spouse, and if you said those words, and you're drawing them out, and they're able to tell you more about what's going on or what happened throughout their day, they just feel connected, right? And all the ladies in the room are saying, yes, please keep talking about this, right? It's the way that Natalie and I work. Because we have to connect before we can really connect. And that's what she always tells me. And now that's true. And so, what I've realized is that feelings aren't always right. But you can't ever argue with feelings, because they're how you feel. They're always real. And so the ultimate level of really communication, which unfortunately not very many of us ever really get to, especially in our marriages, is number 4, and that's deep needs. Deep needs. Let me tell you what I really need. Let me tell you what I really need and what's really going on in my life today. A lot of us are just walking through and we don't ever get to this level, but it's why before I ever officiate a wedding, I always make sure the couple's gone through premarital counseling. Because what books like Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts or The 5 Love Languages really talks about is the needs that we all have in our life. And whether this is true with your spouse or with a friend or with your parents, that we all have needs that we want to be met. But unless we share them and are comfortable enough to share these needs, we really can't get to this area. So if you're married in the room today, maybe your next right step is to really find out your spouse's needs if you've never done this before. If you're saying, hey, we're having a hard time communicating, and I don't really know what's going on with them, maybe just go to them and say, hey, how are you doing? What are some needs that I can meet in your life today? And that'll change everything for you. But how many of you know that we all have these areas of communication in our life, but there's some barriers that come up when things don't go right? Aren't there? So these are on your outline, and you can fill in the blanks for these ones. The first level of barrier of communication when it breaks down is this: withdrawal. Withdrawal. How many of you have ever been in a fight with somebody in your life? What do you first do? You tend to withdraw. You put up walls, and you start to play the silent treatment. Anyone ever played the silent treatment before? Yes. If you're not raising your hand, I don't believe you. And so we've all played the silent treatment. And it's gotten so bad to where I heard this story recently where this guy was playing the silent treatment with his wife, and he had a flight to take the next morning, but he was going to bed before she was. And so he left a note next to her toothbrush, knowing that she would brush her teeth before she went to bed. And then he went and crawled into bed, and on the note it said, please wake me up at 5 a.m. because I have a flight that I need to catch. Well, the next morning came about, and his alarm didn't go off, and so he rolls out of bed, and he's looking at his alarm clock, and it says 9 a.m., and he's freaking out. And so he looks next to his alarm clock, and there's a note next to it that says, wake up, it's 5 a.m. Now, guys in the room, we are not fit for such battles against our wives. So just stop the silent treatment. No, but it's so true, right? That if you've ever been in silent treatment before, you just can't win. Or you have so much pride that you feel like, okay, what am I really going to do here? Number 2, escalation. Escalation. So you go from withdrawal to then escalation. This is where tempers start raising. This is where you start saying heated words that you wish you could take back. This is where you start raising your voices, guys, and it never works, does it? If you've ever raised your voice, does it ever make it better? No. Because even if you do get your way, guess what? Their heart doesn't receive it and you still lose. So raising our voice doesn't ever really work. And we've all made that mistake. And then we jump to the third one, which is belittling. Where we start to bring, or try to bring that person down to our level and point out things that maybe aren't right or aren't true, but we do it so that we can feel better about ourselves. And so we belittle. And this isn't just in marriages, but it's all over social media as well too, isn't it? I mean, you see it all over the place where people are just putting each other down, and it's just a constant headache. It's in every single area of communication that we really go through in our lives. This couple was fighting, they were driving on the countryside, and they were driving past some donkeys. And the guy makes a quick remark as he looks out and says, "Hey, are those some of your extended family?" And she said, "Yeah, in-laws." And so, yes, donkeys. Yeah, okay. And then number 4, false belief. False belief. John 8:44, not in your outline, but it'll be up here on the screen. It says, "For there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar, the father of all lies." This is talking of Satan. And what I truly believe is that whether you believe in Jesus or not, that there are 2 different sides fighting for your soul. That the enemy of your soul, Satan, is the father of lies. And that he wants to speak lies into our relationships, through our communication. They're going to break down these barriers and walls, and that are really going to change things. And so you start to believe things about your spouse or about someone in your life that really isn't even true. But that you start speaking because you got into this area where it's escalated so bad and you belittled so long that you start to believe it to be true. And so false belief sets in and it breaks down every single area of communication. Have you ever seen this to be true in your life? I know I have. And it's a scary place to be in. And it's not where God wants us to be. And so what I really think is that we need to go through our guiding principle today to really see how we should communicate. Because our guiding principle today is this. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Maybe you've heard this before, but this was George Bernard Shaw, a famous playwright, who said this. He said, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." So what is it saying? In every single area of life, be intentional. If you want to write down a word on top of your outline today, it's that word, intentional. Because how many times have you thought you said something? Or maybe you said that to your spouse, "Oh, I told you that." And then they're like, "No, I never heard that from you," right? If you're intentional in speaking this in every single area, to your boss, to your coworkers, to your friends, to your family members, to your spouse, to everyone in your life, if you're intentional, then you will finally get across what you're trying to say. Be proactive, not reactive. So how can we change this? I believe that we need to have an uncommon approach, which is why we title this message today, Uncommon Communication. We need to have an uncommon approach, an approach that's different to communication. And the first way to do that is to focus on moving forward, not mistakes from the past. Focus on moving forward, not mistakes from the past. Proverbs 3:5-6 says this, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." We spoke about this a little bit earlier, but one of the greatest tools that I believe that the enemy wants to use in our life is really allowing us to be caught up in our past. Whether it's words that someone has spoken over you or words that you have spoken to someone that keep being brought back around. And really what I want you to do today is to move forward from them. Because Satan, the enemy of our soul, wants us to be caught up in this so many times over and over and over again, so that we will not move forward in the freedom that Jesus really has for us. Do you believe that there's freedom in Jesus? I mean, there is. And so that's what I want for all of us in every single area of communication in our life and in every single relationship, is to really walk in freedom and move forward into this way. You maybe heard this before, but hurt people, don't they? And if you're living in hurt every single day, guess what? You're going to hurt people. Hurt people really do hurt people. Here Here at Timberlake, we're big proponents of counseling. This may take some counseling. But when you go to counseling, don't just go to rehash everything that's happened from the past. Go to talk about it, yes, but then to move forward in freedom into the life that God really has planned for you. That's really what counseling should be all about. How many of us have things we wish we could have taken back? Well, here's the reality. There's things that we wish we could have taken back, but today you can choose to put those in the past and really move forward in freedom. And you can never move forward while living in the past, can you? It's like that analogy, maybe you've heard it before, of driving in your car. How many of you ever driven forward while just constantly looking in that little rearview mirror? No, none of us would do that, would we? Because we would rear-end someone in front of us, and we get into more accidents in our life. But that's how we live our lives, isn't it? A lot of us live our lives this way, where instead of looking forward all the time, we just keep glancing backward, just constantly focusing on what's behind us. And then we run into more stuff over and over and over again. When God's saying, you don't leave that stuff behind you, I've forgiven you for that, and move forward really in the freedom that I have planned for you today. And as we do that, we can really start to have proper communication, but it starts in this area where you can leave those things behind. And then once we've done this, we can move into then starting to have healthy communication and do that through number 2, which is decide to add value to every conversation. Decide to add value to every single conversation. Proverbs 15:1 says this, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. A harsh word stirs up anger. The way you answer doesn't just show that you care, it really shows how you value someone, doesn't it? I mean, the way that you answer when someone's talking to you really shows the value in them. Proverbs 25:11 says this, a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. What's it saying? Use both words that are valuable and beautiful. Valuable and beautiful. In every single conversation. If you go into it saying, hey, how can I speak words over this person that are going to bring value to their life and are going to be beautiful and uplifting and encouraging? I think it would change everything. On my way to school every day when I'm driving Charlotte to school, rather, she's in preschool, I'll drive her there and I'll always say, Charlotte, do you know that God has big plans for your life? And she says, yes, Dad, you tell me every day. I say, yeah, but I want you to get this. God has big plans for your life. And then as she gets older, I'm going to tell her, hey, Charlotte, don't let the world change you, but you go change the world. And why do I want to speak this over my daughter, and I'm going to speak this over all 3 of my daughters, is because I want them to know that words are powerful, and that I want to speak those into their day before they start. And words of value that are beautiful and uplifting to them, that add value to their life. Catch this morning. What would it look like if in every single relationship in your life you did this? Every single person you came in contact with that you wanted to move past just general information and go to deeper needs, you actually did this. You spoke words that were beautiful and uplifting and valuable. And you thought about others more than you thought about yourself. If you're a boss in the room, guess what? You will get more out of your employees if you speak words of encouragement and of life rather than belittling and trying to get them motivated out of fear. It's just true. It's just been proven. And so when we do this in every single area, it really does change everything. Number 3, create a kindness calendar. You might be saying, what does that mean? Create a kindness calendar. Remember how I said earlier, write down that word intentional? If you haven't written it down, I would encourage you to really write it down, because this word intentional really changes everything. And this is what we're really talking about in this one. What I mean here is to be intentional in your kindness. When you put something in your calendar, what do? You're marking out a time for that. And you look back at it, and so you set that opportunity in your calendar, whether it's for a meeting, or for going to the gym, or for going on a date night with your spouse, or whatever it is. What would it look like if you put in your calendar an opportunity to reflect on conversations you've had, and to really speak kindness into somebody, maybe that you have torn down that you need to build back up, or just someone that you value? I mean, what would it look like if we were constantly uplifting people around us? If whenever somebody popped into your mind, you wrote them a quick text or an email or called them and said, hey, I was just thinking about you and I just care about you this morning. You've done so much for my life. I mean, that would change everything, wouldn't it? And so if we create a kindness calendar, it'll really change everything. Proverbs 3:3 says this, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Because what does kindness do? Kindness creates an atmosphere where you can feel safe to open up and share, doesn't it? How many of you have ever been in a conversation where you didn't feel safe? And so because you didn't feel safe, you didn't open up. Maybe it's with a boss and they were coming about it and they were just going at you. And they were just talking about all the ways you're screwing up. I mean, I deal with this with Pastor Ben all the time. No, I'm just kidding. Ben, I hope you're not watching this. But maybe you've been in this with your boss, right? And if they would have just come about it in a different way and made you feel safe, you would have been open to talk about what was really going on in your life, areas that you could have improved on your own, rather than them bringing it up to you. See, it's when we create safety in conversations and in communication that we're really open to really share what is really going on. See, when you speak words of love and of kindness, it creates a safe place. This week, schedule into your days times where you will create kindness and really speak this into people. And how can we do this? Number 4, by living a God-first life. By living a God-first life. Jesus modeled this for us on the cross. And even before that, when he was in the garden, when he was praying to the Father. And over and over again in times, as you read in the New Testament, where Jesus really escaped and had uncommon communication with God. And it's known as prayer. Where Jesus said, God, not my will, but your will be done. And I believe if we did that in every single conversation, if we put our pride aside and said, not what I want to get across, but really what I want to receive from you, everything would change, wouldn't it? Because how many of you walked into a conversation and you just want to just lay out everything that's going on in your day, things that are going on inside your life, but if really you sat back first and you let the other person talk, it would change everything. See, Jesus understood this is the way that prayer works. He understood that he needed to hear from God first before he would do anything. And if we did that same thing with our lives, if we lived a God-first life, rather than going into even our prayer lives and saying, hey, God, and prayer, if you've never been in church before, it's really just talking to God. It doesn't have to be this big elaborate thing, but a lot of times people think prayer is this amazing opportunity where you get to tell God up in heaven, who's this genie in a bottle, really what you want from him. When in reality, what we should be doing is aligning our hearts to him and hearing what he wants for us. And as we do that, that's when everything changes. And so that's what this really looks like, of living a God-first life. This is what Jesus really did. Proverbs 2:6-8 says this, for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless. For he guards the course of the just and protects the way of the faithful. Now, how do we do this? How do we do this? Like I mentioned earlier, be intentional. Be intentional. But there's one quick way to really stop and to really do this. It's to really create that kindness calendar and to think about this every single day. Now, how many of you have ever been in a conversation with somebody and it's got a little heated? Yeah? And then it's escalated and it's gotten worse. What would it look like in that moment if you just grabbed their hands and said, hey, would you pray with me? I mean, how weird would that be for one? But what are they going to say? No, I'm not going to pray with you, right? What if they said, okay, let's pray. And if you invite God into the conversation, don't you think that would change some things? Because what would that do? Would that break down the walls of pride and all the things that have been built up? Next time you're in a fight, I challenge you to do this. To really grab your spouse's hands, or hopefully not your coworker's hands or whatever, right? But just, say, hey, would you pray with me? If you're in an atmosphere where you can do this. And if you do this, I guarantee you that all the walls will break down. It may sound weird, but it'll change everything. Now, we were in our growth group this last week, and we were talking about last week's message, and one of the questions was just so cliche, and so, okay, here's the answer for it. And really the question was this, and maybe you're going over the weekend message in your growth group as well too, but the question was, what in life is most important to you? What in life is most important to you? And my wife said, okay, I'm going to take the answer that everyone's going to say, and it's the answer that everyone, if you've ever been in church in your entire life growing up in Sunday school, you would know that the correct answer is always what? Jesus, right? It's always Jesus. And so that's what's most important in life, or at least what everyone would say. Now, whether that's true or not, it really is what will change everything if it is true. This is what I do know to be true, is that when God is first, when you're in a constant relationship with him, when he is first in your life, it changes every single area of communication. It makes us so that we're not focused on ourselves, but we're focused on Him and on loving others, the two greatest commandments that He's called us to do. And so, this is hard to do, though, isn't it? This is hard to do. But what this does is it takes us putting our focus back on God first. So maybe you're here today and you're saying, Jeff, how can I do that? You just say yes to Jesus. You just say yes to God, invite Him in to conversations that maybe you've messed up in the past in. He wants to forgive you for those. Maybe for walking into the future, you don't know what you're going to say in a conversation. Who's ever been in a conversation like that, where you're walking into something and you're like, I didn't know what I'm going to say. Invite God in and it'll change everything there. Because here's what I do know, is that what happens in my own life is that when I get stressed, when I get tired, when I get hungry, all I do is I think about myself. Anyone else in the room the same way? But when I put God first, it really changes everything. It really changes every single area of my life by taking the focus off of me and putting it back on Him. And I do know this to be true. It doesn't just change in this level of communication, but it changes every single area as well too this morning. So when I put my focus back on God, I can do this by moving forward, by letting things go from the past. I can choose to start adding value in every single conversation. And as I do this, I can have true conversations the way that I really want to. I can encourage that person in my life and watch them really come into the person that God's called them to be. I can create a kindness calendar. And I can do this by really putting God first. So here's what I know to be true, is that if we take responsibility for our words and are really purposeful with our communication, and we really speak words of life, we can create an atmosphere where God's freedom comes in, He really changes us, and where we are really able to be freed from our past and walk in to have conversations the way that He wants for us to have in the future. But it takes us first putting Him first. And so wherever you're at this morning, would you pray with me?